No, there's no new car. You can't buy it. Try it. Go try it. You're on it. Seriously. There's no new car.
Good afternoon. How's everybody? I'm Philip Bankhead, past president of this club, and I'd like to call this meeting to order, if I can get everyone to stop talking for a second. All right. So I remembered that part. It's funny, I was thinking as I hear about the news of inflation, rampant inflation, and stock market's down, obviously. I was president in 2019 to 20. Is that right? 09, no, actually 09 to 10. It's only a decade apart. And right in the middle of the financial collapse, if I recall very clearly. In fact, we had adopted the new theme that year, flat is the new up. So we'll see how this year goes. I'm confident that under the new leadership of Jeff Mended coming in, being installed next week, that we actually accomplished quite a bit that year, and I'm sure we'll be doing the same this year. So if I, at this time, could call up, let's see, Nolan Duck is going to do triple duty here. Give the invocation, Pledge of Allegiance, and National Anthem. If everybody could rise, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, past President Phillip. And Laurie sent me some information that and I pulled up the wrong email that Laurie sent me. You told me someone we're supposed to remember.
Leo Avila has a family member that's ill, and Happy Franklin has a niece that's recovering from surgery.
Thank you so much. Are there any other prayer concerns that anyone would like to voice? Yes, Pat.
I'd like to pray for our assistant pastor, Father Mike, who has experienced a stroke in intensive care.
So Father Mike, who's had a stroke, we need to pray for him. Anyone else or any joys you would like to express? Well, that's a happy time. Better leave that alone. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so indeed grateful that we can rub elbows with people of like mind, moving in the same direction, looking to help others around us, more so than focusing upon ourselves. Lord God, we ask that you would in every way give us the inspiration, the encouragement, the ability, the strength, the perseverance that is necessary to be able to touch the lives of the people around us and help them as they are facing times of need. Lord, we also ask that you would in every way give us in this room the opportunity to get to know each other better and help each other as well as we serve together in this great organization. Lord, we lift up to you Happy's the Happy's sister that is facing some very difficult times, the priest who's had the stroke, and others that go unmentioned, and ask that you would surround them with your loving kindness and give them the strength and health that they need. Thank you for the food you have provided for us today, and thank you for the chance to be together. Amen.
Amen.
Now, if you'll turn and face the flag, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All will say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we marched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the lumps bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does the star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you.
Thanks, Nolan. You know, I was so excited to ring the bell that I forgot to explain why I'm up here. Unfortunately, Happy Franklin, current president, is unhappy the fact that she had COVID now for the second time. And she was doing fine in recovery until the doctor gave her medicine that she had a reaction to. But she's past that now, feeling well, is what she says. However, she's a little concerned about people being thinking that she might infect them. So she decided to, I think she is tuning in via the live stream that Mark is doing. So at this time, we want to introduce any guests. And Richard, if you've got the microphone and walk around, any guests that we have here today that they'd like to introduce? If you'd stand up with your
Certainly we're going to introduce Susan. This is Susan Cahoon. She is Colin's spouse, and Colin is our speaker today. So welcome, Susan.
Okay, it looks like we're light on guests today. So Mark KASHAR is going to recognize our marketplace advertisers. I think all of them, right?
Yes, everybody. Be my last marketplace announcement advertisement. Michelle Brown's going to be taking over next year. You don't see the smile on Philip's face, but he knows what I'm going to be doing. Here to thank everybody who's an advertiser over the past year. Everybody's been great to work with. Thank you guys so much for the sponsorship of the Hub. We're glad to announce we've got 19 of our advertisers returning, so we've got 3 spots left. So the cost for an ad is $425 a year. Love to have anybody new be an advertiser for the next year, so please ask. But again, thanks everybody for their sponsorship of the Hub over the past year, and looking forward for some new advertisers. So please be sure to call me if you have any questions on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Mark has alluded to the fact that he's stepping in as the new treasurer. So no one is more happy than I am about that promotion. Now it's time for Happy Bucks. I've just informed, as a matter of fact, that Richard Stanford, this is his happy birthday today. So everybody
Yes.
wish Richard a happy birthday.
So I guess I'll start it off but it's not my birthday. My wife is retiring in a couple of weeks. That's what I'm putting this money in for. That's a change of life. So anybody else?
Oh, I do.
Yes. Okay.
I just want to give a wonderful $5 to all the men in this room for Father's Day. I swear my daughter's a beautiful woman, and it's because of my husband. So happy Father's Day. Enjoy the U.S. Open. Whatever you guys want to do, you deserve it. So there. Happy
Thank you, Kathy.
I'm happy this past weekend, we had our family reunion down in Austin, and there were 60 family members that were there, and we all made it home safely.
That's great.
That's great. All right, fantastic. Thanks so much. If I could call up Eric Harrison. We've got a blue badge exchange. Eric is the... First of all, congratulations. Thank you. Eric is the classic great new member. He's jumped in. He's just, again, agreed to be a walking marshal for the parade in a few weeks. And he's just back from taking our kids from Hillcrest High School down to Ryla, the leadership camp, back and forth. You want to say a word about that? We've got a little extra time. Just for a second.
Well, what I can tell you is this was the first year in a couple years, for obvious reasons, that we were able to send kids to Ryla, and it came together very slowly, and I was worried we weren't going to have any kids to send, and then I wasn't sure they were going to show up once they agreed to go, but when Joy Gold and I picked them up a couple of weeks ago and drove them back, they literally did not stop talking for the whole ride back, and we're just so thankful, grateful for the opportunity to be there. They can't wait to come to a camp meeting, hopefully sometime this fall, and just, and I said, now you guys have got to go, you know, tell everybody at Hillcrest, and they're like, oh my gosh, we can't wait to tell everybody. So it was a really neat experience, so just a great outreach that this club did for Ryla, and a really neat thing to be associated with. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric, for taking a leadership position. Now Sarah OLIAI is going to talk about a little event that's coming up in a few weeks that we're hoping everyone will participate in.
Well, I wanted to update you on our meal count first. So we're at 1,003,746 meals. And we're still collecting because now the people who are signing up for the parade are making donations. So I'm hopeful that we'll still see this number grow, and we're still in the period of time where we have a triple match. But as Philip mentioned, it is a little event that we're working on, and we need lots of volunteers. So if you're in town on the 4th of July and you haven't already volunteered for something, please contact myself. Send me an email, send me a text, and I'll let Philip or Tom know, because we all need volunteers. Okay? Thanks, and I hope to see you all there.
Yes, Tom Rhodes is stepping in to orchestrate and manage the Gore Park this year. And I'm kind of, Liz Landon and I are in charge of walking marshals and stationary marshals. It seems like that becomes more popular year after year. Become stationary instead of walking for some reason. So we need all mobile marshals, if at all possible. Thanks. All right, I've got a series of announcements before we're going to introduce the speaker. Most importantly, next Friday, it's going to be a busy week, by the way, but next Friday is the both the awards and the installation luncheon that's going to be at Ozona over on Greenville Avenue. You know, this is really a celebration time of all that's been accomplished this year in recognition of outstanding members in a variety of different categories. And then also it's the formal installation of the new officers coming in, new directors as well as officers for the new Rotary year that will begin July 1. So I encourage everyone to sign up, register and sign up, 2 different steps on the website. It's very important that actually Ozona requires a hard count, and so Monday at 10 a.m. is the cutoff time, so please do that over the weekend if at all possible. Next Wednesday, the 22nd, PCRConnect, Holly Hollenbeck as well as Michelle Brown are in charge of that, orchestrating that this year. They're going to have it at the True Food Kitchen that's in Preston Center East. Beginning at 5, ending at 7 roughly, depending on who lingers around. But that's going to be, again, next Wednesday, the 22nd, 5 to 7. Then Happy, I think, has organized one last fellowship event under her term. There's the special Jane Goodall exhibit that's at the Pruitt Museum of Nature and Science. Buy tickets directly at the Pruitt Museum website, but everybody's meeting there about 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, the 26th. So lastly, I think everyone here has paid their dues, but if anybody's dialing in on the live stream, one of my last official duties as current treasurer is to harangue people once again that dues are past due at this point. So everybody make sure to get your membership dues in. So with that, let me turn it over to Richard Stanford to introduce our speaker today.
Colin Cahoon graduated from New Mexico State and went into the Army as a commissioned officer, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but was a platoon leader of an Aero Scout platoon in the helicopter battalion. He put in 1,000 or more hours in helicopters. And now also, you're going to have to explain to us, because I don't know what for, but he actually got the Meritorious Service Medal, the U.S. Meritorious Service Medal, which is not lightly given. So in 88, he became, well, he came back, he went to SMU Law School. Now, I'm embarrassed, so did I, but I was not cum laude, you know. So he graduated toward the top of his class at SMU, became a patent attorney, and like a lot of lawyers, has this creative urge to write. You know, he's written 3 books. They're all back. I think he'll be selling any of them if you want to buy some. I'm certainly going to do that. But lawyers love to write, and basically he's not only nonfiction but historical fiction also, and so he's a great writer. Now what I really like about, he and Susan split time between Dallas and Steamboat Springs. Now, I just wish we were all in Steamboat Springs right now, and I don't know why you're not. But anyway, Colin's going to talk to us about Mended Wings. So please welcome Colin Cahoon.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for having me here today. Special thanks to my wife for being here, Susan. I've done a number of presentations to Rotary clubs, and when I got the invitation to come to Park Cities, this is the first time it ever said, and bring a guest. I was like, are you kidding me? I can bring a guest? And I was like, so I brought my favorite guest in the whole world, and that's my wife, Susan, so I appreciate her being here today. How many veterans do we have out in the audience today? Let's show of hands. Thank you for your service. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you for being here today. Mended Wings is a little bit different departure for me as far as writing goes. It's different from my first 2 books. They're historical fiction, but mystery thriller, kind of Sherlock Holmesy. Mended Wings is history. It's biography. It's about 10 guys. It's about 10 heroes. When I was in flight school at what we refer to it as Fort Rucker, Mother Rucker is what we used to call it, in 1984, my flight instructors were all Vietnam vets. When I got to my first unit at the 7th Infantry Division, all the senior warrant officers and field grade officers were all Vietnam vets. These guys were my heroes, and I looked up to them. They made me the best Army aviator I could be. They made me the best Army officer I could be. And so Mended Wings is I dedicate it to them, to that generation. I wrote it for them. As I said, to me, they're heroes. They will tell you, the 10 guys in this book, they will tell you they're not. There were 40,000 helicopter pilots in Vietnam. All the guys that flew helicopters in Vietnam all volunteered for that avocation. Some of them did it for patriotic reasons, but to be honest, the vast majority of them did it because they wanted to be pilots. They wanted to fly. Now, I have never met an Army aviator who flew in combat in Vietnam who wasn't shot down at least once. And a lot of them were shot down multiple times. About half the helicopters they flew never came back due to combat damage. A lot of them have Purple Hearts. To be in this book, you had to have been injured in combat, had to have had a Purple Heart. Probably, I'm not sure of the exact statistic, but probably more than half of the 40,000 had Purple Hearts coming back from Vietnam. It was pretty common. And those guys would say, see, I told you, I'm not a hero. I'm just one of 40,000. I'm just one of the guys. The heroes are the ones who didn't come back. I'm not a hero. And I understand that. But they're wrong. And I think that if you read Mended Wings, you will agree with me. So let's talk about this generation. Here's our generation that's in the book. These are all pictures of some of the vets that are in the book with me. The book, like I said, has 10 guys, and so there's a chapter dedicated to each guy. And I've organized these chapters by the date that they were injured in combat. So you actually get to see the arc of the entire war through their eyes, because the first guy was injured in 1966 when we were really starting to ramp up in Vietnam, sending entire divisions over. The last guy injured, now it's not the last chapter because there's kind of a surprise chapter at the end, but the 9th chapter, the guy was injured at the end of 1972. He got his 5th Purple Heart at the end of 1972, when there really wasn't much by way of combat power left in Vietnam, other than air crews and a sprinkling of advisors. That's about all that we had left. And then I put little historical bridges between each chapter so that you can remember what was going on in Vietnam at the time. You can remember what was going on back home at the time. So you get the whole arc of the war through this book. Now, each chapter is organized in a specific way. Let's see if I can get this to go. Oops. Now it's back up one. Oh, mine's working now. Okay. So each one is organized in a certain way. I start the chapter. You know these guys are going to get hurt. They had to be hurt to be in the book. So I start the chapter. They are flying towards that event. The bullets are flying through the cockpit. The smoke is filling in the cockpit. Bits and pieces are flying around. And then I stop the chapter. And I take you back. And next slide, please. I take you back to their childhood, where they grew up. And I'm just going to call them out. I think that's probably easier. I take you back to their childhood, where they grew up, where they went to high school, joining the Army, going to flight school. And then eventually, of course, we got to get to Vietnam. Now, some of these guys were injured early in a first tour. Some of them were injured late in a second tour, everything in between. Next slide, please. So I tell you about what happened to them in Vietnam, their Vietnam experience. And I take you all the way back up to where I left you, right before they were going to get hurt. But I don't stop there. I take you further. Maybe medevac to Saigon, surgery in Japan, rehab in the United States. Next slide, please. And we keep going because this is a story about the generation. It's not just a story about their Vietnam experience. I take you where they come back to the United States. They get out of the Army, and then they have to learn how to deal with both the physical and mental injuries that they bring back from Vietnam and how they succeed and where they are today, taking you all the way. All 10 of these guys are still alive today, taking you all the way up to, say, you know, retired in Seattle, enjoying their wife and grandchildren. Now, with the time that I have left, and I would love to take some questions at the end, I'm going to give you just a little taste of two of the veterans that are in this book. Next slide, please. The very first veteran is Pruitt Helm. Pruitt grew up in Aurora, Colorado. You can see by the picture of him fishing. He loved to go fishing and camping with his dad. They went out in the woods all the time. But more than anything else, he wanted to be a pilot. He grew up near the Stapleton Airport. He saw the old Connies taking off from Stapleton. He so much wanted to be a pilot. But just as happens, not with just this generation, I know my generation experienced the same thing, eventually you get what? You get a driver's license. And then, you know, driver's license, cars, girls, alcohol, a lot more fun than school, right? Pruitt was a very bright guy, but he graduated with very poor grades. Guess what? He couldn't get into college. And back then, if you couldn't get into college, you couldn't be a pilot. What to do? Well, he bummed around for a while, literally. He was a ski bum in Breckenridge. He taught people how to ski, worked the ski lifts. Eventually, he joined the National Guard, and while he was in the National Guard, he heard about this program that the Army had. It was called High School to Flight School. I don't need a college degree to be a pilot. What a fantastic deal. So he figured, what the heck? So he signed up, and he went to flight school. And next slide, please. After he graduated from flight school, his first duty station was actually in Korea. And we see Pruitt here with his H-23 observation helicopter. After he was there for just a short time, he was assigned as the private pilot for a general. And this general loved to pheasant hunt. And so he kept a shotgun with him all the time and in the helicopter. And as they're flying around, if the general saw some, I don't know if admirals do this, by the way, but when the general saw, probably not. When the general saw something that looked promising, he'd say, land here, and he'd let the general off, and he'd get situated, and then he'd tell Pruitt, okay, over there along the hedge, and Pruitt would act as the bird dog. He'd take the helicopter up, he'd fly along, he'd flush the pheasants out, the general would shoot them, and they'd go back and they'd eat the pheasants. But all good things must come to an end. Next slide, please. And eventually, his tour in Korea is over. He comes back to the United States. He's assigned to the 4th Infantry Division near Seattle as a pilot of the brand new Huey Gunships. These are C-model Huey Gunships built nearby here at Fort Worth by Bell Helicopter. This particular one's in the hog configuration. You can tell because you see that round, the cylindrical thing on the side. Those are for rockets. It's a rocket pods. So they load this thing up with as many rockets as it carry, and it's a big fat pig, and they call it a hog. So that's what it is. Its job is to suppress the enemy while the good guys are landing or taking off or whatever. And one of the missions that Pruitt was on after he'd been there for several months is the mission that he was on when he was injured and received his Purple Heart. So let's go there. Pruitt is part of, there's 9 of these C-model gunships. They're going to escort a very large flight of other Hueys that are carrying soldiers to the relief of a special forces unit that has been in a running gun battle with North Vietnamese regulars near the Cambodian border for a couple of days. And they are just about to get wiped out if they're not rescued soon. So they're going to send in the grunts to take over the battle, and Pruitt's job in this gunship is to support that effort. Now, as they're flying towards the battle and the grunts are landing in an LZ, Pruitt's gunship and all the gunships really fly through what I would call sort of an aerial ambush with heavy machine guns from the North Vietnamese army. As he flies through this ambush, they come out the other side. The aircraft is on fire somewhere. It's smoking badly. There's a lot of smoke in the cockpit. And I think all of us here would agree that they've kind of put in a day, right? I think you can go home now. Your aircraft's on fire. It's time to head back. But that's not what their job was. Their job was to protect the guys on the ground, and that's just what pilots did back then in Vietnam. They looked at each other briefly without communicating a word. They both knew they were in concurrence, and they turned that aircraft back around, and they flew back from where they had come. As they were coming back around, the aircraft in front of them, the C-model in front of them, exploded in a ball of flame, and they kept going. They run back into the aerial ambush, and not surprising, they get shot down. The aircraft is on fire. The engine quits. They're headed towards the jungle. It's a crash landing. The aircraft hits the ground, and there's a fire on board. Pruitt can't get out. For some reason, he can't get himself out of the aircraft. The crew chief in the back, who's badly burned by now, manages to come around, open the door, jerks Pruitt out, and literally as he's dragging him a few feet away from the aircraft explodes. Now we have 4 crew members in the jungle. They landed in no man's land between the 2 fighting sides. Both of the men in the back are badly burned. Both the pilots have broken backs. They are in this no man's land for 24 hours with the machine gun ripping through the jungle, whacks of fragments from artillery from both sides splitting into trees. It's a very nightmare situation. To make matters worse, they had no water, had no fluids, because the only thing they brought to drink was the beer that was in the back of the aircraft, and the aircraft exploded, and so they don't have that anymore. After about, like I said, 24 hours in the jungle living through this, there's a very surreal rescue. I don't have time to go into the whole chapter, but there's a very surreal rescue. Pruitt is rescued. He's brought out, and he is in a hospital in Saigon. Now, when he's in that hospital, a priest comes up to him and tries to issue last rites, which he doesn't understand, and he refuses. And then a doctor comes up and explains to him, says, now, Mr. Pruitt, here's the situation. Yes, your back is broken, but worse, your kidneys have failed because you didn't have fluid for 24 hours. And if we don't get a dialysis machine hooked up to you very quickly, you're going to die. And the problem is, and the reason we're giving you last rites, is because there is no working dialysis machine in South Vietnam right now. Now, this is a brand new hospital. We just came from Japan. We brought one with us on the ship, and the ship's in the Saigon harbor, but I don't know where it is on that ship. And unless we find it quickly, you're not going to wake up. I'm sorry. You sure you don't want me to bring the priest back? And Pruitt said, no, don't do it. So Pruitt blacks out not knowing if he's ever going to wake up again, but he does wake up. And when he does, there's this dialysis machine that's humming away right next to him, and the same doctor's standing there. And he says, Pruitt, you're not going to believe this, but that dialysis machine was on the last Connex that was loaded on that ship in Japan. It was on the first Connex when it came off the ship in Saigon Harbor. You are the luckiest damn soldier in Vietnam, which is what I titled the name of his chapter, The Luckiest Damn Soldier. Now, 2 more times while he's trying to get his kidneys back online, because I don't know if it's different now, but back then, if you didn't get your kidneys working within about 90 days, you'd die anyway, even if you had a dialysis machine. And 2 more times where they're trying to get his kidneys functioning again, Pruitt blacks out, being told he probably won't wake up again. And 2 more times, a miracle happens, and every time he wakes up, there's a doctor standing there saying, damn, Pruitt, you are the luckiest damn soldier in this hospital. And so again, that's why he got the name of the chapter. Eventually, Pruitt's kidneys do come back online, but now he's a paraplegic, and he's discharged from the Army. Next slide, please. Fortunately, Pruitt's dad was the kind of guy that said, literally, you're going to get back on that horse. Now, this is 67, 68. You remember Pruitt liked to fish and hunt and camp and stuff like that. How do you do that at that? They didn't have ATVs to do it. How do you do that? Well, neither of these guys had ever ridden a horse, but they thought, what the heck, maybe a horse would do it. So his dad bought 2 horses with the helps of ropes and pulleys and just putting it over a tree limb. They figure they'd tie Pruitt off and haul him up and plop him down in the saddle, and lo and behold, he could start going out in the woods again with his dad, go fishing and hunting. He got to be a pretty good horseman. He joined the Federal Aviation Administration as an air traffic controller, and one year he was actually awarded the Handicap Employee of the Year. The little picture in the bottom there, that is Pruitt getting the award from the woman on his left. That is First Lady Pat Nixon. Eventually he retired from the FAA, by the way. The woman on the left there, he was at a Morgan horse show one year, and he sees this beautiful blonde riding a Morgan one direction, and he's riding around the arena in the other direction. And every time they pass each other, they flirt. And they pass each other, and they pass each other, and then eventually they start riding in around that arena together. And a few months later, they're married. Pruitt had 2 children naturally, which he was told as a paraplegic would never happen. Another miracle in his life. When he retired from the FAA, he didn't stop, though. Pruitt started a company that developed rehab machinery for paraplegics that is still the gold standard today, used around the world. He also was an advocate of monoskis. Have you seen those before? For paraplegics, they got a little ski on the bottom and the outriggers they use on their arms. He was a big advocate for that. So that is Pruitt today. In the upper left, that's about 4 or 5 years ago, sitting with his wife. He lives today in Montana, retired with his wife and enjoying his grandchildren. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you about one more of my veterans, and I use this guy for something to illustrate something that is quite frankly not very pleasant, but you're going to hear it anyway. This is Eddie Hester, the youngest of Hester boys. He's the youngest of 7 Hester boys. Grew up in Irvine, California, to a blue collar. His dad was a union worker. A bunch of rough and rowdy crew, quite frankly. They had a reputation around town. I'll give you an example. The brother, 2 brothers older than Eddie, senior year in high school, he's called in the principal's office because he refused to take a SWAT from the coach. We don't do that anymore, but refused to take a SWAT from the coach. And so the principal was explaining to Eddie's older brother, he said, "Sit down, Master Hester," and the guy took a seat in front of his desk, and he explained to him he was going to take that SWAT because the principal was going to give it to him. And as Eddie's brother didn't appreciate that, he stood up, he grabbed that chair, and he threw it at the principal. The principal ducked, and the chair went over his head, out the window, down from the 2nd floor onto the ground below. Fortunately, it didn't hit anybody. Now, let's fast forward to the brother 1 older than Eddie. Very similar situation. He's senior year. He's called in the principal's office. "Master Hester, sit down." He sat down. The principal broke the news to him that he didn't want to hear. The young man reached down, grabbed the chair. It was bolted to the floor. Now let's go to Eddie. Eddie was a little bit better student than his brothers. He probably learned, I guess by the time he watched 6 of them get in trouble after those years, he kind of kept his nose a little bit cleaner. His senior year, the principal sees Eddie walking down the high school near graduation time, says, "Master Hester, I'd like to ask you a question." He says, "Yes, sir." And he said, "All your brothers came to visit me in my office numerous times. I knew your brothers well. You never came to visit me. Why is that?" And Eddie looked him in the face and he said, "Sir, there was no point. The chair was bolted to the floor." Which gives you an idea of Eddie's sense of humor, which got him in trouble a few times in the Army. There's a very humorous story in the book about warrant officer candidate Frog, because the vicious TAC officers at warrant officer candidate school literally took a frog and assigned it to their unit. And so there's all kinds of escapades about that that I commend to you. But eventually we got to get Eddie to Vietnam. Next slide, please. And Eddie had a pretty rough tour in Vietnam, I guess is a good way to put it. He was a combat pilot in Huey's for a year. He not only witnessed the death of many of his friends, some of his roommates and so forth, but on 2 occasions he had to go to graves registration and identify the bodies of his best friends. The second time he did it was the young man who's in the left corner there with the airborne patch on his shoulder. The guy on the right in the red hair is Eddie. The guy on the left is Captain Miller. His nickname was Lafong, so they all called him Captain Lafong. Captain Lafong was killed in a crash. His aircraft was shot down and there was a post-crash fire. Eddie went to graves registration to identify the body, and it was too badly burned. Nobody could identify the body. But that smell of burning human flesh has never left Eddie to this day. It's very strong in his memory. And in fact, 30 years after Vietnam, he went to Dachau with his children. And they were in one of the incinerator rooms. And when he walked in, you and I probably wouldn't notice anything at all, but the smell was so overwhelming to Eddie Hester that he had to excuse himself and recollect himself outside. Eddie actually got 2 Purple Hearts during his tour in Vietnam. I'm going to tell you about his first Purple Heart. The mission involved flying one of those Hueys into a landing zone that had been very hastily prepared. There was a South Vietnamese Army unit that had been surrounded, and they had a lot of wounded, and they were facing annihilation if they couldn't get them out of the jungle soon. So the South Vietnamese unit had blown some trees in place, it cleared out an area just big enough for one aircraft to get in there. They needed 5 aircraft to get them all out. That's how many there were. And they put medics on the first 2 aircraft because the thought was, let's get the worst wounded out first. They'll throw them on the aircraft, and then we'll start pulling out the guys that aren't wounded quite as bad till we get everybody out there. So Eddie is flying chalk number 2. He has the medic on board. When the first aircraft lands into the LZ, the first thing the pilot says is, I'm taking heavy fire. And the aircraft's in there a little longer than Eddie expected, so Eddie had to do what's called a go-around. So he's coming in for a landing. The aircraft's still in the landing zone. He goes into a very steep, high-speed turn, high-speed maneuver as he's coming around. Now, Eddie didn't realize it at the time, but the doors on the aircraft were off so that they were open. And as he's coming around that turn, a bullet came through the opening where the doors would be and actually severed the lap belts that were holding him into the aircraft. Now, he didn't know because the G-forces kept pushing him back in that seat. But as he came back around, and this time he's going to do his landing, he comes into the landing zone. Now, like I said, it was hastily prepared, so there were lots of tree stumps and stuff in there, so he couldn't land. He had to stay at a hover while they're tossing the bodies on board, the wounded men on board. Now, if you're a helicopter pilot, what you do in that situation to keep that steady hover as the conditions are changing is you pick out something maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 yards out in front of you, and he picked out a tree stump, and you just focus on it. And as long as you can keep that tree stump perfectly still, that means your aircraft is perfectly still. And so that's what Eddie did. He came into land, he picked out a tree stump. No sooner had he picked out a tree stump to focus on than he felt what he described as someone with a ball-peen hammer whacking him in the ribs over and over and over again. Now, what was happening is there was actually an enemy machine gun just outside the rotor tip of the aircraft firing point blank into the cockpit at Eddie, and it was piercing through the armor that was around his seat. It was hitting him in the armor chest, his chicken plate they called it, that was around his body. And that's the thumping he was feeling with the machine gun bullets hitting him in the chest. Now, he also started to bleed somewhere. The blood was coming down into his eyes, and he was starting to lose his eyesight, and he was starting to lose sight of that stump out front. So he yells over the intercom to the co-pilot to take the controls. There's no response. He again yells to the co-pilot to take the controls, and he glances over, and the co-pilot's head is cocked forward, presumably dead. So Eddie's on his own. He's got to figure out how to make it work. So he just keeps blinking and focusing and screaming at the co-pilot to take, or the crew chief in the back, to take out that machine gunner. And the crew chief tells him, I've got no more ammunition, sir. He had an M60 door gun. He's got no more ammunition. Now, this crew chief had done an unauthorized modification to his M60 machine gun, though. He had actually strapped a grenade launcher to it, unauthorized. And he said, sir, all I've got left is the grenade launcher. And, of course, Eddie said, well, use it. And he said, sir, I can't. He's too close. If I do, we might damage the aircraft. And I'll leave out the expletive, but you know what he said. Take out the, do it. And the crew chief relents. He fires the grenade launcher, kills 2 enemy soldiers, takes out that machine gun. At least that immediate threat has been neutralized, although there are still bullets flying into the cockpit. In the meantime, Eddie's focusing on keeping that tree stump in one place. He's screaming at the crew chief, are we up yet? Are we up yet? Because they got to get all the guys on board. Not yet, sir, not yet. Finally, the crew chief says, we're up, meaning we got all the bodies we can carry on board. Eddie says, I can't see the instrument panel. You're going to have to come over the top and read off my readings to it, because he can't over-torque that engine as he's pulling out of the LZ with a full load. Crew chief looks over the top. 47, sir, 48, he's pulling in more power, 49, 50, that's it, sir, 50, your max torque. Eddie holds that power, and the aircraft wobbles out of the LZ, comes out over the top, and he flies to the nearest hospital, where he shuts down on the pad because the aircraft is a battle damage, won't fly anymore. Eddie does recover from that. Now, I said there's something unpleasant in this story, and really it's what happens next. Because as you've already heard, he's lost several friends, being in Vietnam for a year, Graves registration issues, he's been wounded twice, 2 Purple Hearts. He gets a month's leave to go home to see his parents and friends. And as he is going through, well, let's back up a second. Back then, back in those days, you were either in the military or you weren't, right? As a male, that age. And the guys that were in the military, you knew it because they had short hair. And the guys that weren't in the military, you knew it because they didn't have short hair. In fact, they typically had long hair. So even though Eddie was in his civilian clothes, walking through the LAX airport, going to the cab stand so he can go home to see his parents, as he's walking through LAX, another young man who had long hair walked up to him and spit in his face. Now, when Eddie got home, all the girls he knew in high school, the ones he dated, the ones he'd been friends with, would have nothing to do with him because he was a baby killer. All of his male friends that he had in high school wouldn't return his calls, would have nothing to do with him. He was home for 2 weeks when he finally went to his parents and he said, you know, Mom and Dad, I love you and I love being home with you, but I can't take this anymore. I can't take it. I'm cutting my leave short. I'm going to Germany, which is my next duty assignment. I'll spend my next 2 weeks in Germany. You know, I'm sorry. I'm gone. Eddie Hester was ready to come home to America. America was not ready for Eddie Hester to come home. And I'm ashamed to say this is not an isolated or anecdotal story. I've given this presentation many times. I'm always saddened by the veterans who will come up to me afterwards and say, you know, the same thing happened to me. And so we talk about the greatest generation. They were fantastic, our World War II generation. I think the Korean vets were kind of our forgotten generation. I call the Vietnam vets the abused generation. Because not only did we not honor them, we abused them when they came home. And it's not till recently that we've started recognizing them. And so let me ask again, I asked about veterans. I love all veterans. I want to see the hands of the Vietnam veterans, those that served in Vietnam. Do we have any out here today? Any Vietnam veterans? All right. Well, you know, you see them now. They're actually wearing their caps. And I always say thank you for your service to all veterans, because I think we ought to honor all veterans. I add a little something extra for the Vietnam vets that I commend to you. And that is, after I say thank you for your service, I say welcome home. And I commend that to you, because we didn't tell them that when they came home. And I think we need to tell them that now. Eddie did finish out his tour in Germany. Next slide, please. Eventually, he comes home. He serves in the California National Guard, and he goes back to school, which he said was a little difficult being a vet, but he manages through it. And he gets a degree. He actually goes to law school. And Eddie is today still a practicing lawyer in California. He keeps promising me that he's going to slow down, but he hasn't quite done it yet. That's his wife. He enjoys his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. Next slide, please. And with that, I have told you a little bit about my book. I would love to take some questions, and as we said, there are some books that we'll be selling in the back here at the end. Yes?
Love to know, I guess, how you went about interviewing all of these men, and how long did it take? I mean, you obviously went into a lot of detail with each of them. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So first I had to find them. There's an organization called the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association. They have a magazine that comes out once every 2 months. I put an ad in there and directed people to my website where there was a video and an application form. Had about 20 guys sign up. I then interviewed those guys. We whittled it down to 10. Once I had my 10 guys, I did between 6 and 12 hours of personal interviews with each guy. I also talked to other pilots that they flew. I talked to family members. I did research. There's a lot of stuff you can get online nowadays about various units and combat and stuff like that. And so it was a very long, involved process. And then they were also involved in the editing process. They made sure that they all bought into their chapters and were comfortable with it. So, yes.
So
Yes,
kind
sir.
of a story for you / question. One of my mentors growing up was a gentleman named Sandy Kaplan. He flew helicopters as well in Vietnam. And after Vietnam, he actually got into the corporate world, and he became a helicopter pilot for Dow Jones. And he would fly between New Jersey and New York, back and forth, the executives. He did that for like 25, 30 years. And the funny story was he was one of my mentors for a lot of reasons, but one of them was the CEO of Dow Jones Newswire right before he retired said, "Sandy, this is our last trip together. You've been flying me for 25 years. I just joined this new company called AOL. I really highly recommend you invest in the stock. It's like trading at however many cents right now, but I really have a good feeling about it." So Sandy's yacht that he bought a couple years ago is named Thanks AOL. But my question was, so how many of those pilots ended up coming back in doing commercial work? Where did a lot of them end up?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. These vets are injured to varying degrees. Pruitt Helm was a paraplegic. My Chapter 2 vet actually had brain damage. You wouldn't know it at all, though. He's one of the brightest, funniest guys I ever met. He ended up being a Presbyterian priest, of all things. A number of these guys did go on to continue to fly helicopters. The Chapter 3 vet, Chris Kilgore, is actually a local. You may have heard of him. He was on the Rowlett City Council for a number of years. He ended up flying for the Coast Guard. And then some of these guys flew commercially. My Chapter 7 vet, Clyde Ramiro, the only black pilot in the book, and that's really a very rare bird. Only about 1% of the pilots over there were black. Ended up flying jets for the Air Force, and then he was a pilot for Delta as well. So all of them loved to fly. They all wanted, Pruitt Helm, even being a paraplegic, he actually got his pilot license. He got an aircraft modified so that he could fly it without his legs, and he actually got back in the cockpit. Yeah. Yes, Fort Walters. That was where they sent you initially to do your primary training. You'd fly typically a piston-powered aircraft, and then from there, most of them went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, to finish their training. But yeah, it's up by Mineral Wells, is where. So we trained. All these guys came through Texas first, before they went other places. Yep. No, Fort Walters is closed. Yeah.
It's me. I can just scream it out. Did any of the people that you interviewed become POWs at any point?
No, none of them became POWs. Yeah, thank God. I think we got one over here.
I'm just curious, if I look at the three main areas of service, I think of the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. Which had...
Marine Corps.
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
Marines
Marine Corps,
over here.
yes, Marine Corps. Sorry. Which would you say had the highest casualty rate of those areas of service?
Well, I don't know that, well, if you're just talking about strictly in Vietnam, I think the two most, this is a very general statement, because obviously there were some extremely dangerous jobs, being a Navy SEAL or something like that. But I would say that for the sort of general job, the two most dangerous things you could have done in Vietnam were to be a helicopter pilot or to be a small unit leader, like a platoon leader, a Marine Corps platoon leader, an Army infantry platoon leader, those young lieutenants and captains, because they were out there in the bush. They always had a radio man standing next to them, so that antenna identified who they were, and they were very high sniping targets out there. So I think that generally speaking, those were the two most dangerous. There's, I think, a little over 7% of all the helicopter pilots were killed in Vietnam. 7%, a little over, like close to 8%. Yeah, if you flew combat aviation in Vietnam, your chances of being killed were certainly worse than 1 in 10, and your chances of being injured were well over 50%. Yeah.
And we have a family member, my son's brother-in-law is just deployed flying helicopters. He was in Mosul, he was in Kosovo, and now he's in the Sinai. So I'd love for you to keep his name in your prayers.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Bradley Fickett. Bradley.
Yes. And tell him thank you for his service when you talk to him. Yeah.
Is that it? Thank you,
Right.
Colin.
Thank
That's fabulous.
Colin, thank you. That was outstanding. And if you're half as good a writer as you are a storyteller, it's got to be a great book. Thanks very much for being here today. A book in your honor will be placed in McSHAN Elementary School.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Let me remind everybody again that next week is our special awards and installation luncheon at Ozona Grill on Greenville Avenue. Sign up, register, as well as pay before 10 o'clock on Monday morning, because we have to guarantee the number. With that, let me have Eric Harrison come back and lead us in the four-way test. Everyone will stand up, please.
Thank you, Philip. Would you please recite with me? Of all the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, be beneficial to all concerned. And we are.